19 years ago, a 23-year-old restaurant worker in Detroit vanished on her short drive home, leaving her mother waiting by the window with the porch light on. Police suspected a late-night carjacking since her vehicle disappeared with her, but with limited surveillance and no DNA matches, the investigation eventually hit a dead end. Yet over the years, Harper Phillips's mother never gave up, holding candlelight vigils each October and writing letters to police, until new forensic technology emerged. A detail overlooked for nearly 2 decades suddenly revealed a trusted neighbor's betrayal, shaking the community and changing the case forever. Before we dive into this shocking story, let us know where you're watching from, and don't forget to subscribe for more true crime documentaries. The neon lights of Murphy's Diner were still glowing when Harper Phillips pushed through the glass door for the last time. October 14, 2006. Wrapped Detroit's east side in autumn's crisp embrace, with streetlights casting amber pools along Gratiot Avenue. While most of the city settled into sleep, the sodium lamps flickered against a star-scattered sky, and Harper's breath formed small clouds as she fumbled for her car keys in the restaurant's parking lot. At 23, Harper carried dreams bigger than the cramped diner where she served coffee and pie to night shift workers from the nearby Chrysler plant. Her dark hair was always pulled back in a practical ponytail, and her brown eyes held the determined spark of someone who saw beyond her current circumstances. She'd been saving every tip for nursing school applications, studying anatomy textbooks during slow shifts, and planning a future that stretched far beyond the worn vinyl booths of Murphy's. She said, "See you tomorrow, Janet," and gave me that smile of hers, recalled Janet Morrison, who was closing the kitchen that night. Harper never left without saying goodbye to everyone. She was just that kind of person. Thoughtful, you know. She even reminded me to lock the back door before I left. The Honda Civic waiting in the parking lot wasn't much to look at. A 1998 model, with rust spots creeping along the wheel wells and a passenger door that was stuck in cold weather. But it was Harper's ticket to independence, purchased with her own money after months of double shifts. She'd named it Hope, joking that it might not be pretty, but it got her where she needed to go. That October night carried the scent of dying leaves and distant wood smoke from chimneys, just beginning their seasonal duty. Harper's usual route home was simple: down Gratiot to 7 Mile Road, then a quick left onto her street where a Saul brick house waited with yellow light spilling from the front windows. 12 minutes on a good night, 15 if she caught the red light at the intersection near the old Kmart. Her mother, Lorraine Phillips, was waiting by that front window as she did every night. Harper worked late. At 51, Lorraine had the weathered hands of a woman who'd cleaned office buildings for 20 years to support her daughter's ambitions. She'd positioned herself in the living room chair that faced the street, a cup of chamomile tea growing cold on the side table, her eyes trained on the corner where Harper's headlights should appear. The diner's security camera captured Harper walking to her car at exactly 11:42 p.m., her server's apron folded over her arm and her purse slung across her shoulder. She moved with the tired but satisfied gait of someone who'd earned an honest day's pay. The grainy footage shows her pausing beside the Honda, checking her phone one last time before sliding into the driver's seat. What the camera couldn't capture was the sense of unease that had settled over Detroit's east side in recent months. 3 women had been robbed at gunpoint near the Gratiot corridor, and everyone was talking about staying vigilant, keeping car doors locked, avoiding dark parking lots. Harper had been careful, she always was, but in 2006, there was no GPS tracking, no smartphone location sharing, no digital breadcrumbs to follow if something went wrong. The Honda's engine turned over with its familiar rough idle, and Harper pulled out of Murphy's parking lot into the sparse late-night traffic. A delivery truck rumbled past heading toward the freeway. A police cruiser sat parked outside the 24-hour gas station 2 blocks away. Everything seemed ordinary, routine, safe. But that night was different. By 12:30 a.m., when Harper still hadn't come home, Lorraine felt the first flutter of real concern. Harper never deviated from her routine without calling. She was the daughter who checked in, who remembered to say where she was going and when she'd be back. The kind of young woman who'd rather be 5 minutes early than 1 minute late. Lorraine called Harper's cell phone and heard it ring through to voicemail. "Hi. You've reached Harper. Leave me a message, and I'll call you back." The cheerful voice felt like a ghost in the silence of the living room. As the clock struck 1:00 a.m., then 1:30, Lorraine knew with a mother's terrible certainty that something had gone catastrophically wrong. The porch light that she always left on for Harper's return became something else entirely, a beacon of hope piercing the darkness, waiting for a daughter who would never make it home. Dawn broke over Detroit's industrial landscape like a reluctant witness, casting long shadows across empty lots and abandoned factories. October 15th arrived wrapped in fog that hung low over the railroad tracks running parallel to Harper's usual route home. By 6:47 a.m., when a Conrail engineer spotted something unusual near the crossing at 7 Mile Road, the morning air carried the metallic taste of coming rain. Harper's Honda Civic sat abandoned beside the tracks, its silver paint dulled by overnight moisture and its windows fogged from the inside. The car was positioned at an odd angle, as if it had been driven there hastily and left without care. All 4 doors were locked, the engine cold, and there was no sign of Harper Phillips anywhere. Officer Maria Santos was the first responder on scene, her police cruiser's red and blue lights cutting through the gray morning as she approached the vehicle. Santos had been patrolling Detroit's east side for 8 years, and she'd seen enough abandoned cars to know the difference between a breakdown and something more sinister. This felt wrong from the moment she stepped out of her patrol car. The vehicle was locked up tight, Santos would later testify, windows up, doors secured, but when I looked through the passenger side window, I could see a woman's purse sitting on the seat, a pair of sunglasses on the dashboard, and what looked like loose change in the cup holder. Nobody abandons a car with valuables inside unless something forces them to leave quickly. Inside the Honda, Harper's world remained frozen in time. Her black leather purse contained her driver's license, $17 in cash, and a folded nursing school brochure she'd been carrying for weeks. A half-empty bottle of water sat in the door pocket, and her server's apron lay crumpled on the back seat where she'd tossed it after her shift. The only thing missing was Harper herself and the car key. By 7:15 a.m., the scene had transformed into a hub of urgent activity. Detective Ray Coleman arrived as fog began lifting from the railroad tracks, revealing the industrial wasteland that stretched in every direction. Abandoned warehouses loomed like sleeping giants, their broken windows reflecting the gray sky. Tall grass grew wild between rusted rail cars that hadn't moved in years, creating countless hiding spots where someone could disappear without a trace. Lorraine Phillips arrived at 7:30 a.m., having followed the police scanner chatter that neighbors had picked up on their emergency radios. She moved toward her daughter's car like a woman walking through a nightmare, her face pale and her hands trembling, as she recognized the rust spots and the small dent in the rear bumper from where Harper had backed into a shopping cart the previous summer. "She would never leave her car like this," Lorraine whispered to Detective Coleman, her voice barely audible above the distant rumble of morning freight trains. "Harper's careful with everything she owns. She saves her pennies. She maintains what's hers. Someone took her from this car." The crime scene team began their methodical work as neighbors gathered at a respectful distance, drawn by the flashing police lights and the terrible magnetism of tragedy. Mrs. Chen, from the corner house, brought coffee for the officers. Tommy Rodriguez, who worked nights at the nearby auto parts store, offered to help search the immediate area. Word spread through the tight-knit community like ripples in still water. Harper Phillips, the girl who always smiled when she walked past on her way to work, was missing. Detective Coleman supervised the processing of Harper's Honda with the gravity of someone who understood that every piece of evidence might be the key to bringing her home safely. In 2006, forensic technology had its limitations, but they worked with what they had. Fingerprint powder dusted across every surface, soil samples collected from the tire treads, and photographs taken from every conceivable angle. The car's interior told a story of interrupted routine. Harper's cell phone was nowhere to be found, but her car charger remained plugged into the cigarette lighter. A grocery list written in her neat handwriting sat folded in the console: milk, bread, laundry detergent, the ordinary concerns of a young woman planning for a future she would never see. As morning stretched toward noon, The reality of Harper's disappearance settled over the scene like the fog that had finally lifted from the railroad tracks. This wasn't a case of a car breaking down or a young woman deciding to disappear on her own. The locked doors, the personal belongings left behind, and the remote location near the tracks all pointed to one terrifying conclusion. Harper Phillips had been taken against her will. The search was about to begin in earnest, but already the clock was ticking. In missing person cases, the first 48 hours are crucial, and precious time was already slipping away like sand through desperate fingers. The community was about to mobilize in ways they'd never imagined, united by love for a young woman whose only crime had been driving home from an honest day's work. By noon on October 15th, Detroit's East Side had transformed into a command center of organized desperation. The parking lot of Murphy's Diner became ground zero for the largest missing person search the neighborhood had seen in decades, with police cruisers, volunteer vehicles, and emergency response units, creating a maze of activity under the October sun that had finally burned through the morning fog. Detective Ray Coleman stood before a growing crowd of volunteers, his voice carrying the authority of someone who'd worked missing person cases for 15 years. We're going to search in a grid pattern, starting from where Harper's car was found and working outward, he announced, spreading a street map across the hood of his unmarked sedan. We're looking for anything, clothing, personal items, any sign that Harper was in the area. The search teams deployed with military precision across the industrial wasteland surrounding the railroad tracks. Retired auto worker Brenda Martinez led a group through the abandoned Packard plant ruins, their voices echoing off concrete walls as they called Harper's name. A team of nurses from Detroit, receiving hospital, combed through tall grass between freight cars, their medical training making them especially valuable for spotting evidence that others might miss. Michigan State Police brought in bloodhounds that arrived in specialized transport vehicles, their handlers already suiting up the German shepherds that would attempt to track Harper's scent from her abandoned Honda. The dogs worked methodically, their noses pressed to the ground as they followed invisible trails that led in frustrating circles before disappearing entirely near a chain-link fence that bordered an active rail line. The dogs kept losing the scent at the same spot, recalled handler Susan Walsh, whose German Shepherd Rex had found missing persons in 12 previous cases. It was like Harper's trail just ended there, which usually means she was moved by vehicle, but we kept searching because you never know what you might find. Detective Coleman coordinated with Wayne County Sheriff's Department to bring in aerial support, a helicopter that circled overhead with thermal imaging equipment, its rotors creating a steady percussion that could be heard for miles. The aircraft traced geometric patterns across abandoned lots, vacant buildings, and the Detroit River waterfront where bodies sometimes surfaced after foul play. Lorraine Phillips refused to stay at home while others searched for her daughter. Despite Detective Coleman's gentle suggestions that she let the professionals handle the investigation, Harper's mother joined every search team, her presence serving as both inspiration and heartbreak for the volunteers who'd never met Harper, but couldn't ignore a mother's desperation. Mrs. Phillips had this way of talking about Harper like she was right there with us, remembered volunteer Lisa Chen, who organized the food station for search teams. She'd tell us about Harper's laugh, about how she wanted to be a pediatric nurse, about the way she'd light up when she talked about helping sick children. It made Harper feel real to all of us, not just a name on a missing person poster. The technical aspects of the search revealed the limitations of 2006 technology in ways that would seem primitive by modern standards. There were no cell phone towers equipped for location tracking, no GPS breadcrumbs to follow, and no social media accounts to provide digital clues about Harper's final hours. Investigators relied on old-fashioned police work, canvassing businesses for security footage, interviewing witnesses, and hoping that physical evidence would point them in the right direction. Murphy's Diner became an unofficial headquarters, where search teams gathered between sweeps of the surrounding area. Owner Mike Murphy, a gruff man with a soft heart, kept coffee brewing around the clock, and refused payment from anyone involved in looking for Harper. The diner's walls filled with missing person flyers bearing Harper's photograph, her nursing school application picture showing a young woman with hopeful eyes and a determined smile. As the first day of searching stretched into evening, The scope of the investigation expanded to include every business, residence, and vacant building within a 5-mile radius of where Harper's car was discovered. Police knocked on doors, showed Harper's photograph to anyone who would look, and asked the same questions over and over. Had anyone seen Harper Phillips? Had anyone noticed suspicious activity on the night of October? Did anyone remember seeing her Honda Civic driving through the neighborhood? The answers were consistently heartbreaking. No, no, and by sunset on October 15th, more than 200 people had participated in the search effort, covering an area that stretched from the Detroit River to 8 Mile Road. They'd found discarded clothing that didn't belong to Harper, broken cell phones that weren't hers, and personal items that raised hopes before dashing them with DNA tests that ruled out any connection to the missing young woman. Detective Coleman gathered the volunteer search teams as darkness fell, his voice heavy with the weight of a day that had produced more questions than answers. The investigation was far from over, but the urgency of the first 24 hours was giving way to the grinding reality of a case that might not be solved quickly. Harper Phillips remained missing, and every hour that passed made her safe return less likely. October 16th dawned gray and cold, matching the somber mood that had settled over Detroit's east side like a heavy blanket. St. Matthew's Catholic Church, where Harper had attended Mass with her mother every Sunday since childhood, opened its doors at 6 a.m. for a special prayer service that drew parishioners from across the city. Father Michael Santos stood before an overflowing congregation, his voice carrying both hope and heartbreak as he led prayers for Harper's safe return. "We gather not in despair, but in faith," Father Santos said, his words echoing off the church's vaulted ceiling. "Harper Phillips is our daughter, our neighbor, our friend. We will not rest until she comes home." The congregation responded with "Amen" in voices that ranged from whispered pleas to defiant declarations of hope. The missing person posters appeared overnight like flowers after rain, plastered on every telephone pole, bus stop, and storefront window within a 10-mile radius. Harper's nursing school application photo smiled down from hundreds of locations, accompanied by text that read, "Missing, Harper Phillips 23, last seen October 14." Local print shop owner Dave Kowalski had stayed up all night running copies, refusing payment and working through his entire stock of poster board. Murphy's Diner transformed into an unofficial command center, where information flowed like coffee from the perpetually brewing pots. Owner Mike Murphy had cleared the back room of storage boxes, creating space for volunteer coordinators to manage the dozens of tips that were already flowing in from the public. A whiteboard mounted on the wall tracked potential leads with the methodical precision of a military operation. Everyone had a theory, recalled Janet Morrison, who'd taken leave from her kitchen duties to help coordinate volunteer efforts. People were calling in saying they'd seen Harper at gas stations, at the mall, walking down streets 20 miles away. "We wrote down every single tip, because you never know which one might be real." The first significant lead came from Marcus Williams, a night shift security guard at a warehouse complex near where Harper's car was found. Williams claimed he'd seen a silver Honda Civic driving erratically through the industrial area around midnight on October 14th. Followed by a dark-colored pickup truck. The vehicles had been moving too fast for Williams to make out license plates, but his description matched Harper's car perfectly. Detective Coleman interviewed Williams personally, driving to the warehouse at the same time of night to understand the lighting conditions and sightlines. The security guard seemed credible. He'd worked the same shift for 3 years and knew the normal traffic patterns in the area, but without additional witnesses or surveillance footage, his testimony remained frustratingly incomplete. Williams was certain about what he saw. Detective Coleman noted in his case files, silver Honda definitely being followed by a pickup truck, but the industrial area has dozens of pickup trucks coming and going for legitimate business. We needed more to build a case. The second major lead emerged from an unexpected source, 16-year-old Amy Patterson, who'd been sneaking out to meet her boyfriend when she heard what sounded like a woman screaming near the railroad tracks. Amy had been too scared to investigate at the time, and too afraid of getting in trouble to report it immediately. Only after seeing Harper's picture on the news did she realize the potential significance of what she'd heard. I keep thinking about it, Amy told Detective Coleman during her interview at the police station, her mother sitting beside her with a mix of concern and pride. It was around midnight, maybe a little after. I heard a woman's voice, like she was scared or hurt, but I was scared too, so I just ran back home. The timeline aligned perfectly with Harper's disappearance, and Amy's description of the location matched the area where Harper's Honda had been discovered. But without physical evidence or additional witnesses, the lead remained tantalizingly incomplete. Detective Coleman assigned officers to canvass the area around Amy's house, hoping to find other residents who might have heard similar sounds. Community response to Harper's disappearance revealed the tight-knit nature of Detroit's East Side neighborhoods, where everyone knew everyone else's business, and tragedy affected the entire community. Miss Elena Rodriguez organized a candlelight vigil for October 18th, 4 days after Harper's disappearance, sending handwritten invitations to every house within a 6-block radius. Harper's not just missing from her family, Mrs. Rodriguez explained to local news reporter Sarah Kim. She's missing from all of us. She's the girl who helped carry groceries for Mrs. Chen, who always had a smile when she walked past our houses. When someone like that disappears, it tears a hole in the whole neighborhood. The vigil drew more than 300 people to the parking lot where Harper's car had been discovered, their candles creating a constellation of flickering light against the industrial darkness. Lorraine Phillips stood before the crowd with Harper's high school graduation photo clutched against her chest, her voice steady despite the tears streaming down her face, as she thanked everyone for refusing to give up hope. But hope was becoming harder to maintain as each lead dissolved into frustration and each day passed without answers. 3 weeks after Harper Phillips disappeared, Detective Ray Coleman sat in his office at Detroit Police Headquarters, surrounded by case files that seemed to mock his efforts with their lack of concrete evidence. The investigation had consumed every waking hour since October 14th, but despite the dedication of his team and the community's unwavering support, the case was hitting walls at every turn. The fingerprint analysis from Harper's Honda Civic had yielded nothing useful. The crime scene technicians had lifted dozens of partial prints from the steering wheel, door handles, and dashboard, but the quality was too poor for identification. In 2006, fingerprint technology required clear, complete ridge patterns for comparison, and the smudged, overlapping prints found in Harper's car fell short of that standard. We were dealing with a vehicle that Harper drove daily, Coleman explained to Captain Robert Hayes during their weekly case review. Her prints were everywhere, along with her mother's, co-workers from the diner, and probably a dozen other people who'd been passengers over the years. The partial prints we found could belong to anyone, including Harper herself. DNA evidence presented even greater challenges. The Michigan State Police Crime Lab had analyzed every biological sample collected from the Honda hair follicles found on the seat, saliva traces from a discarded piece of gum, even skin cells recovered from the door handles. But DNA technology in 2006 required larger samples and clearer genetic material than what investigators could extract from Harper's vehicle. Dr. Patricia Williams, the forensic scientist assigned to Harper's case, delivered the disappointing news during a conference call that Coleman would remember for years. The samples are too degraded or too mixed with other genetic material to provide a viable DNA profile, she reported, her professional tone unable to hide her frustration. We're pushing the limits of current technology, but we need more material to work with. The lack of surveillance footage compounded the investigation's challenges. In 2006, security cameras were expensive and relatively uncommon in the industrial area where Harper disappeared. The few businesses that had installed surveillance systems used analog recording equipment that provided grainy, often unusable footage. Murphy's Diner had a single camera pointed at the parking lot, but it malfunctioned on October 13th and hadn't been repaired by the time Harper finished her final shift. Detective Coleman and his partner, Detective Lisa Park, spent countless hours reviewing what little footage they could obtain. The mobile station 2 blocks from Murphy's had captured Harper's Honda passing by at 11:44 p.m., just 2 minutes after she'd left work. But the timestamp on a traffic camera at 7 Mile Road showed no sign of her vehicle, suggesting that whatever happened to Harper occurred somewhere between those 2 points. "We had a 2-block gap where Harper simply vanished," Detective Park noted in her case summary. 2 blocks in an area with no working cameras, no witnesses, and no physical evidence. It was like she drove into a black hole. The investigation team pursued every possible lead with methodical determination, but each promising development eventually led to disappointment. Marcus Williams, the security guard who'd reported seeing Harper's Honda being followed by a pickup truck, failed a polygraph examination when pressed for additional details. His story began changing under scrutiny. First he was certain about the time, then he wasn't sure. The pickup truck changed color from dark blue to black to possibly green. Amy Patterson, the teenager who'd heard screaming near the railroad tracks, also proved to be an unreliable witness under closer examination. Her timeline shifted depending on who interviewed her, and her description of the sounds became increasingly dramatic with each retelling. Detective Coleman suspected that Amy genuinely wanted to help, but had allowed her imagination to fill in details that her memory couldn't provide. Witness testimony is tricky in cases like this, Coleman reflected years later. People want to help so badly that they sometimes convince themselves they saw or heard more than they actually did. It's not malicious, it's human nature, but it makes our job incredibly difficult. The investigation expanded to include registered sex offenders within a 50-mile radius, parolees with histories of violence against women, and every owner of a pickup truck in the immediate area. Detectives conducted hundreds of interviews, administered dozens of polygraph examinations, and followed up on tips that ranged from credible to bizarre. Nothing produced a viable suspect or actionable evidence. Financial constraints began affecting the investigation's scope, as Detroit Police Department resources were stretched thin by other active cases. The helicopter searches ended after the first week due to budget limitations. Overtime hours for detectives were restricted, forcing Coleman and his team to prioritize their efforts and abandon some of the more time-intensive investigative approaches they'd initially planned. By early December 2006, the Harper Phillips case had been officially reclassified from active investigation to cold case status. The physical evidence was preserved in climate-controlled storage. The case files were transferred to a specialized cold case unit, and Detective Coleman was reassigned to new investigations. But the failure to solve Harper's disappearance would haunt him for the rest of his career, a reminder that sometimes dedication and hard work aren't enough to overcome the limitations of available technology and evidence. December 2006 brought the first winter after Harper's disappearance, and with it came a cruel new reality for Lorraine Phillips. The porch light that had burned continuously since October 14th became a beacon of stubborn hope in a world that seemed determined to move forward without answers. Snow began accumulating on the front steps where Harper should have been walking through the door, and the yellow glow from the living room window served as both comfort and torment for a mother who refused to accept that her daughter might never come home. The transition from active investigation to cold case status felt like a death blow to the Phillips family. Detective Coleman delivered the news personally, sitting in the same living room chair where Lorraine had waited that first terrible night. His words were careful and professional, but they couldn't soften the impact of hearing that Harper's case would no longer receive daily attention from the police department. "We're not giving up," Coleman assured Lorraine, his voice carrying the weight of personal failure. "Cold cases get solved all the time when new evidence emerges or technology improves. Harper's file will remain open, and any new information will be investigated immediately." But both he and Lorraine understood the reality. Without active leads or fresh evidence, Harper's case would join thousands of others gathering dust in filing cabinets. Lorraine's response to her daughter's case going cold revealed the fierce determination that had sustained her through 2 months of uncertainty. She transformed Harper's bedroom into a makeshift investigation center, covering the walls with maps, timelines, and photographs that the police had shared with the family. Every night after finishing her cleaning shift at the downtown office building where she worked, Lorraine would spread Harper's case files across the kitchen table and review them with the methodical persistence of a professional investigator. "I know every detail of that night by heart," Lorraine would tell anyone who would listen. "I know what Harper was wearing, what she had in her purse, what time she left work, what route she took home. Somewhere in those details is the answer to what happened to my daughter, and I'm going to find it. The community's support, which had been overwhelming during the first weeks after Harper's disappearance, began to fade as months passed without resolution. The missing person posters grew weathered and torn, eventually disappearing from storefront windows and telephone poles. The volunteers who had searched tirelessly through October and November returned to their own lives and responsibilities, though many continued to think about Harper and wonder what had become of the young woman whose smile had brightened their neighborhood. Murphy's Diner removed the makeshift command center from its back room, but owner Mike Murphy kept Harper's photograph hanging behind the register, where every customer could see it. "Harper's still part of this place," he would tell new employees who asked about the picture. "She worked here, she was family, and we don't forget family." The first anniversary of Harper's disappearance on October 14, 2007, brought renewed attention to the case but no new leads. Local news stations aired updated reports featuring Lorraine's plea for information, but the coverage felt routine and perfunctory compared to the intense media attention of the previous year. The city had moved on to newer tragedies and fresher mysteries, leaving Harper's case to occupy the lonely space reserved for unsolved crimes. Lorraine organized an annual candlelight vigil that drew dozens of faithful supporters to St. Matthew's Catholic Church, but the crowd was noticeably smaller than the hundreds who had gathered during those first desperate weeks. Father Santos continued to include Harper in his Sunday prayers, and the church maintained a special candle that burned in the sanctuary every day of the year. But even religious faith couldn't fill the growing void left by official inaction and public forgetfulness. The financial strain of maintaining hope began taking its toll on the Phillips family. Lorraine had used her vacation time and sick leave during the initial investigation, and her reduced income made it difficult to keep up with the costs of continuing the search. She'd hired a private investigator for 3 months, exhausting Harper's college savings account to pay for services that ultimately produced no actionable results. Harper's father, David Phillips, who had divorced Lorraine when Harper was 12, maintained an uneasy presence at family gatherings and anniversary vigils. His coping mechanism involved immersing himself in work and avoiding the constant reminders of his daughter's fate. The train of Harper's disappearance had reopened old wounds between her parents, creating additional emotional obstacles for a family already devastated by loss. But through all the setbacks and disappointments, Lorraine Phillips maintained her nightly ritual. Every evening, she would turn on the porch light before sunset and position herself in the living room chair that faced the street. She would wait there until midnight, the time when Harper should have arrived home on October 14, 2006, before finally acknowledging that another day had passed without answers. The light continued burning through winter storms, spring rains, summer heat, and autumn winds. Neighbors began using it as a landmark when giving directions, referring to the house with the light that never goes out. For Lorraine, it represented something more profound than hope. It was a promise to Harper that her mother would never stop looking, never stop believing, and never stop fighting for the truth. By 2010, 4 years after Harper Phillips vanished into the October night, Detroit's East Side had undergone transformations that would have been unimaginable when she was still serving coffee at Murphy's Diner. The economic recession had accelerated the industrial decline that had been slowly consuming the neighborhood for decades, leaving behind a landscape of abandoned factories and empty lots where families once built their American dreams. The old Chrysler plant where many of Murphy's regular customers had worked closed permanently in 2009. Taking with it the late-night crowd that had provided Harper with her best tips. Mike Murphy struggled to keep the diner profitable as foot traffic dwindled, but he refused to remove Harper's photograph from behind the register or to stop asking new customers if they'd heard anything about the missing young woman whose smile still watched over the morning coffee service. Lorraine Phillips had evolved into something of a local legend, known throughout the neighborhood as the woman who refused to give up hope. Her porch light had become a symbol that transcended Harper's specific case, representing every family who'd lost someone to violence or circumstance. Parents would point out the yellow glow to their children and explain that some lights are meant to guide loved ones home, no matter how long they've been away. Mrs. Phillips changed how we think about persistence. reflected Elena Rodriguez, who had organized that first candlelight vigil in 2006. She showed us what it looks like to love someone so much that you'll keep fighting even when everyone else has moved on. That light of hers became hope for the whole neighborhood. The annual October vigils had settled into a routine that drew a faithful core of supporters. Even as the broader community attention faded, Matthew's Catholic Church reserved the same October evening each year, and Father Santos would deliver the same message about faith, perseverance, and the power of community love. The attendance averaged around 50 people by 2012, but those who came did so with a dedication of pilgrims returning to a sacred site. Harper's case had influenced how Detroit police handled missing person investigations, leading to policy changes that emphasized immediate action and community engagement. Detective Coleman, who had been promoted to sergeant, used Harper's case as a training example for new investigators, emphasizing the importance of preserving evidence for future technological advances and maintaining communication with victims' families, even during cold case periods. The Harper Phillips case taught us that we can't predict when breakthrough technology will emerge. Sergeant Coleman explained to a criminal justice class at Wayne State University evidence that seems useless today might become the key to solving a case 10 or 20 years from now. We have a responsibility to preserve every sample, document every detail, and never completely close the door on finding answers. The neighborhood around Murphy's Diner had transformed into an unofficial memorial district, with several businesses displaying small signs or stickers bearing Harper's name and the date of her disappearance. The community garden established in Harper's memory became a gathering place for residents who wanted to contribute something positive to a story marked by tragedy and uncertainty. Volunteers maintained the garden year-round, planting flowers that bloomed in rotation from spring through fall. A small wooden bench bore a brass plaque reading Harper's Garden, Where Hope Grows, providing a peaceful spot for reflection and remembrance. Lorraine would sit there on difficult days, tending to the flowers while talking to Harper as if her daughter might still be listening somewhere beyond the visible world. The economic challenges facing Detroit during this period created additional obstacles for families dealing with unsolved crimes. Budget cuts reduced the resources available for cold case investigations, and many families found themselves competing for attention from overworked detectives handling dozens of active cases. Lorraine Phillips became an advocate for other families in similar situations, sharing her knowledge of investigative procedures and providing emotional support for parents who were just beginning their own journeys through the maze of uncertainty. "Lorraine became our teacher," said Maria Santos, whose son disappeared she knew how to work with police, how to organize search efforts, how to keep a case in the public eye, but most importantly, she knew how to survive the waiting. She taught us that hope isn't something you feel, it's something you do every single day. The technological landscape was beginning to shift in ways that would eventually impact Harper's case, though nobody recognized it at the time. Social media platforms were creating new opportunities for sharing information about missing persons, and advances in DNA analysis were making it possible to extract genetic profiles from increasingly small or degraded samples. But in the mid-2010s, these developments remained on the horizon, promising but not yet practical for investigating crimes from. Lorraine Phillips continued her nightly vigil at the living room window, watching for headlights that would never appear while maintaining faith that somehow, someday, Harper's story would find its resolution. The porch light burned through another winter, another spring, another summer, marking time with the steady persistence of a mother's love that refused to acknowledge defeat. January 2023 brought an unseasonably warm morning to Detroit, with temperatures climbing into the 40s, as Detective Sarah Kim opened the cold case file that would change everything. The Wayne County Sheriff's Department had received federal funding to establish a specialized cold case unit equipped with cutting-edge forensic technology, and Harper Phillips's case had been selected for review based on the quality of evidence preservation and the potential for technological breakthrough. Detective Kim, a 15-year veteran with specialized training in genetic genealogy and modern forensic techniques, spread Harper's case materials across her desk, like pieces of a puzzle that had been waiting 17 years for someone with the right tools to solve it. The evidence boxes had been maintained in climate-controlled storage with meticulous care, thanks largely to Detective Coleman's insistence on proper preservation protocols back in 20. What struck me immediately was how well the evidence had been collected and preserved. Detective Kim recalled, Coleman's team had done everything right for the technology available at the time. They couldn't have known that what seemed like useless trace evidence in 2006 would become the key to solving the case. And the breakthrough began with a small fabric fiber that had been recovered from Harper's Honda steering wheel, a microscopic thread that 206 technology couldn't analyze beyond basic composition. Advanced spectroscopy revealed that the fiber came from a specific type of work glove manufactured exclusively for automotive mechanics, narrowing the potential sources significantly from the general population to a much smaller professional group. But the real game-changer emerged from a cotton swab that crime scene technicians had used to collect what appeared to be an oil stain from Harper's passenger seat. The stain had tested negative for DNA using 206 methods, but touch DNA analysis in 2023 revealed something extraordinary: a partial genetic profile embedded in skin cells that had been transferred through minimal contact. Dr. Jennifer Walsh, the forensic geneticist assigned to Harper's case, explained the significance of the discovery during a briefing that brought together investigators, prosecutors, and the Phillips family. Touch DNA technology allows us to extract genetic material from skin cells left behind by the briefest contact, someone touching a surface for just a few seconds. In 2006, this sample would have been considered worthless, but today's techniques can amplify genetic material from as few as 10 cells. The partial DNA profile wasn't sufficient for direct identification through traditional databases, but it provided enough genetic markers for genealogical analysis, an investigative technique that had revolutionized cold case work since Harper's disappearance. By uploading the DNA profile to genealogical databases and tracing family connections through genetic matches, investigators could potentially identify the source even without a direct database hit. Detective Kim worked with Parabon Nanolabs, a company specializing in genetic genealogy for law enforcement, to build a family tree from the DNA evidence found in Harper's Honda. The process took 3 months of painstaking work, analyzing genetic connections and researching family histories, to narrow down potential suspects from thousands of distant relatives to a handful of individuals who fit the geographic and demographic profile. The investigation team also utilized advanced digital forensics to re-examine Harper's case with modern analytical tools. Cell phone tower records that had been too primitive to analyze in 2006 were now accessible through updated databases and mapping software. While Harper's phone had never been recovered, investigators could now track the movement of other devices in the area during the crucial time period, creating a digital map of activity that hadn't been possible 17 years earlier. Geographic Information Systems, GIS technology, allowed investigators to create detailed models of the crime scene area, incorporating elevation data, sightlines, and traffic patterns that could explain how Harper's abductor had moved through the neighborhood undetected. The analysis revealed several previously unnoticed factors that had made Harper particularly vulnerable on the night of her disappearance. Modern technology gave us the ability to see connections that weren't visible in 2006. Detective Kim explained, we could overlay multiple data sources, DNA evidence, fiber analysis, geographical modeling, and genealogical research to create a comprehensive picture that pointed toward a specific individual. The most significant breakthrough came when genealogical analysis identified a family cluster with multiple members living in Detroit's East Side during 2006. Cross-referencing the genetic profile with employment records, vehicle registration, and criminal background checks produced a name that sent shockwaves through the investigation team: Robert Bobby Martinez, a 34-year-old automotive mechanic who had lived just 2 blocks from Harper's route home. Martinez had no significant criminal history beyond minor traffic violations, which explained why he'd never appeared on investigators' radar during the original investigation. He worked at an independent garage, owned a pickup truck matching the general description provided by security guard Marcus Williams, and had access to the specific type of work gloves that had left fibers in Harper's Honda. But most shocking of all, Bobby Martinez had been one of the community volunteers who had participated in the search efforts during those first desperate weeks after Harper's disappearance. He'd walked among Harper's family and friends, offering comfort and assistance, while secretly knowing exactly what had happened to the young woman they were desperately trying to find. March 15, 2023, marked the day when Harper Phillips's ghost finally found her voice. Detective Sarah Kim stood in the war room of the Wayne County Cold Case Unit, surrounded by evidence boards that now told a complete story rather than fragments of tragedy. The genealogical analysis had produced Robert Bobby Martinez's name, but identifying a suspect was only the beginning of building a prosecutable case that could withstand 17 years of legal scrutiny. Martinez, now 51 years old, had continued living in Detroit's East Side throughout the years since Harper's disappearance, working as an independent automotive mechanic from a garage he'd purchased. His life had followed an outwardly normal trajectory: marriage in 2008, 2 children, steady employment, and community involvement that made him appear to be exactly the kind of neighbor everyone trusted. But beneath the surface, investigators were beginning to uncover a pattern of behavior that painted a very different picture. The most chilling aspect was how Martinez had inserted himself into the investigation from the very beginning. Detective Kim noted during a briefing with the prosecutor's office, he volunteered for search parties, attended vigils, and even helped distribute missing person flyers. He was hiding in plain sight, comforting Harper's family, while knowing he was responsible for their pain. Advanced forensic analysis of Martinez's background revealed several concerning elements that had been overlooked in 2006. Employment records showed that he'd called in sick to work on October 15, 2006, the day after Harper's disappearance, claiming a family emergency. His pickup truck had been involved in a minor insurance claim on October 20th for damage to the front bumper that Martinez attributed to hitting a deer, though no police report had been filed for the incident. Detective Kim's team obtained search warrants for Martinez's property, vehicles, and financial records, launching a comprehensive investigation that utilized every technological advantage available. And digital forensics specialists analyzed Martinez's computer equipment, cell phone records, and social media activity going back to 2006, looking for any digital footprints that might connect him to Harper's disappearance. The breakthrough came from an unexpected source: Martinez's own nephew, Danny Martinez, who had been 8 years old in 2006 and was now 25 with children of his own. Danny contacted Detective Kim after seeing news reports about the DNA breakthrough, sharing a memory that had haunted him since childhood, but that he'd never understood the significance up until now. "I remember Uncle Bobby coming to our house really late that night," Danny told investigators during a recorded interview. "He was all dirty and upset, saying his truck broke down and he needed to borrow my dad's car to get home. But what I remember most is that he threw away the clothes he was wearing in our garbage can outside. My mom was mad because he could have just put them in the laundry." The timeline aligned perfectly with Harper's disappearance, and Danny's childhood memory provided investigators with crucial information about Martinez's movements immediately after the crime. More importantly, it explained how Martinez might have disposed of physical evidence that could have connected him to Harper's Honda Civic. Surveillance of Martinez revealed behavioral patterns consistent with someone harboring a significant secret. He avoided driving through the neighborhood where Harper's car had been discovered, despite the route representing a logical shortcut to his workplace. He'd never participated in any of the anniversary vigils after the first year, and employment records showed he'd consistently requested time off during the weeks surrounding October 14th, behavior that could indicate anniversary reactions to traumatic events. The investigation team also discovered that Martinez had made several significant purchases in the months following Harper's disappearance. Bank records showed cash withdrawals totaling nearly $15,000 between November 2006 and March 2007, far exceeding his normal spending patterns. While the cash purchases couldn't be directly traced, The timing suggested someone dealing with expenses related to disposing of evidence or covering up criminal activity. Dr. Walsh's continued analysis of the DNA evidence produced additional matches that strengthened the case against Martinez. Touch DNA recovered from Harper's car door handle yielded genetic material consistent with the profile found on the passenger seat, indicating that Martinez had made contact with multiple surfaces inside Harper's Honda. The probability of the genetic matches belonging to someone other than Martinez was calculated at less than 1 in 50 trillion. The DNA evidence was overwhelming, explained prosecutor Maria Santos during a press conference announcing the charges. We had genetic material from 2 separate locations in Harper's vehicle, both matching Robert Martinez's profile. Combined with circumstantial evidence and witness testimony, we have a strong case that will finally bring justice for Harper Phillips and her family. The arrest warrant for Martinez was signed on March 20, 2023, charging him with kidnapping, murder, and tampering with evidence in connection with Harper Phillips's disappearance. After nearly 17 years of questions without answers, Harper's family was about to learn the truth about what had happened on that October night, when a trusted neighbor's facade had concealed the heart of a killer. The arrest of Robert "Bobby" Martinez unfolded at 6:47 a.m. on March 22, 2023, with the precision of a military operation and the weight of 17 years' worth of accumulated justice. Detective Sarah Kim led a team of 12 officers to Martinez's auto repair shop on Gratiot Avenue, where surveillance teams had confirmed he arrived each morning before sunrise to begin his daily routine of maintaining the machinery and preparing for customers. Martinez was bent over the engine of a 2018 Ford Focus when Detective Kim approached, her badge clearly visible and her voice carrying the authority of someone who'd spent months building an airtight case. "Robert Martinez, you're under arrest for the kidnapping and murder of Harper Phillips," she announced, reading him his Miranda rights, as backup officers secured the garage and ensured no evidence could be destroyed during the arrest process. The reaction from Martinez was everything investigators had hoped for and feared, a moment of complete shock followed by immediate collapse into the persona of a man whose carefully constructed life was disintegrating in real time. "I don't know what you're talking about," he stammered, but his hands were trembling as handcuffs were applied, and his eyes carried the haunted look of someone whose deepest secrets had finally been exposed. News of Martinez's arrest spread through Detroit's East Side like wildfire, creating shockwaves that rippled through a community that had known him as a reliable mechanic, devoted family man, and concerned neighbor for more than 2 decades. The same streets where Harper Phillips had once walked to work were now filled with reporters, police vehicles, and residents struggling to reconcile the Bobby Martinez they knew with the Bobby Martinez who had allegedly murdered a young woman they'd all spent years mourning. "I can't believe it," whispered Elena Rodriguez, standing outside her house as police cars filled the usually quiet neighborhood. "Bobby fixed my car just last month. He asked about my grandchildren. He was so polite and helpful. How do you live next to someone for 17 years and never know they're a killer?" The investigation team immediately executed search warrants for Martinez's home, garage, and vehicles, hoping to uncover additional evidence that could strengthen their case or reveal information about Harper's final moments. The search yielded items that painted a disturbing picture of Martinez's psychology, newspaper clippings about Harper's case dating back to 2006, including photographs from vigils, and search efforts where Martinez himself was visible among the volunteers. In Martinez's bedroom closet, investigators discovered a small wooden box containing personal items that didn't belong to him or his family: a silver earring, a hair elastic, and a keychain bearing the logo of a nursing school. The items hadn't been definitively connected to Harper Phillips, but their presence in Martinez's possession raised terrifying questions about whether Harper had been his only victim, or if other families might finally get answers to their own unsolved mysteries. Detective Kim's interrogation of Martinez stretched over 3 days, with sessions recorded and transcribed as Martinez slowly began revealing details that only Harper's killer could have known. He described the interior of Harper's Honda Civic with accuracy that matched crime scene photographs, recalled specific clothing she'd been wearing that had never been released to the public, and eventually admitted to following Harper from Murphy's Diner on multiple occasions before the night of her disappearance. Martinez had been stalking Harper for weeks. Detective Kim revealed during a press briefing. He knew her schedule, her route home, her habits. The night of October 14th wasn't random, it was the culmination of a predatory pattern that Harper never had a chance to recognize or defend against. The community's reaction to Martinez's confession was a complex mixture of relief, betrayal, and horror. Lorraine Phillips, who had maintained her vigil for 17 years, finally allowed herself to turn off the porch light that had burned continuously since Harper's disappearance. But the victory felt hollow. Justice had arrived, but Harper was still gone, and the man responsible had been living among them, participating in their grief while knowing the truth. Martinez's wife, Carmen, filed for divorce within hours of his arrest, releasing a statement through her attorney that expressed shock, horror, and deep sympathy for Harper's family. "I had no knowledge of my husband's involvement in Harper Phillips's disappearance," the statement read. "My children and I are devastated by these revelations, and we extend our heartfelt condolences to Harper's family and friends." The arrest brought closure to some questions, while raising others that would likely never be answered. Where had Martinez taken Harper after forcing her from her car? How long had she survived? What had been his motive for selecting her as a victim? Some secrets had died with Harper on that October night in 2006, and Martinez's confession, while comprehensive enough to secure a conviction, couldn't resurrect the dreams and possibilities that had been buried with Detroit's beloved daughter. But after 17 years of uncertainty, Harper Phillips finally had justice within reach, and her family could begin the long process of healing that had been impossible while her killer remained free. October 2023 brought Harper Phillips' case full circle as jury selection began for the trial of Robert Martinez, exactly 17 years after Harper had finished her final shift at Murphy's Diner. Wayne County Circuit Court Judge Patricia Henderson presided over proceedings that transformed Courtroom 11402 into a stage where science, justice, and human emotion would intersect in ways that captivated the entire city of Detroit. Prosecutor Maria Santos opened the state's case with a presentation that methodically laid out the evidence against Martinez, beginning with the touch DNA recovered from Harper's Honda Civic and building toward a comprehensive narrative of premeditation, abduction, and murder. Her opening statement painted Martinez as a predator who had stalked Harper for weeks before acting on his violent fantasies. "Ladies and gentlemen of the jury," Santos addressed the 12 citizens who would decide Martinez's fate. Harper Phillips was 23 years old when Robert Martinez decided that his desires were more important than her life. The evidence will show that he planned her abduction, and ultimately murdered her in cold blood. Justice has been delayed for 17 years, but it will not be denied. The prosecution's case unfolded over 6 days of testimony that showcased the technological advances that had made Martinez's conviction possible. Jennifer Walsh, the forensic geneticist, explained touch DNA analysis in terms that jurors could understand, demonstrating how skin cells invisible to the naked eye could provide genetic fingerprints more reliable than traditional fingerprinting methods. The probability that the DNA found in Harper's vehicle belongs to someone other than Robert Martinez is less than 1 in 50 trillion, Dr. Walsh testified, her words carrying the weight of mathematical certainty that left little room for reasonable doubt. To put that in perspective, there are only about 8 billion people on Earth. The odds are so remote that they're essentially impossible. Martinez's defense attorney, Michael Richardson, struggled to counter the overwhelming scientific evidence while maintaining his client's innocence. Richardson's strategy focused on questioning the reliability of DNA evidence that had been stored for 17 years, suggesting that contamination or degradation could have produced false results. But his arguments felt increasingly desperate as the prosecution presented witness after witness who corroborated the timeline and circumstances of Harper's disappearance. Danny Martinez, Bobby's nephew, provided some of the most damaging testimony when he recounted his childhood memory of his uncle arriving at their house on the night of Harper's disappearance. Now 25 and a father himself, Danny spoke with quiet conviction about details that had seemed meaningless to an 8-year-old boy, but had gained terrible significance in the context of Harper's murder. He was covered in dirt, and he was shaking, Danny testified, his voice steady despite the emotional difficulty of testifying against a family member. He threw his clothes in our garbage can and asked to borrow my dad's car. I didn't understand why at the time, but I remember thinking Uncle Bobby looked scared, like something really bad had happened. Lorraine Phillips took the witness stand on the 5th day of testimony, 17 years after beginning her vigil for Harper's safe return. At 68, Harper's mother had aged gracefully despite the weight of prolonged grief, and her testimony about Harper's character, dreams, and the impact of her disappearance moved several jurors to tears. Harper wanted to be a pediatric nurse, Lorraine told the jury, her voice clear and strong despite the emotion in her eyes. She used to say that sick children needed someone who would fight for them, someone who wouldn't give up no matter how difficult things got. That's the kind of person Harper was, a fighter, a caregiver, someone who made the world better just by being in it. The defense's case lasted only 2 days, and largely consisted of character witnesses testifying to Martinez's reputation as a reliable neighbor and community member. But their testimony felt hollow in the face of genetic evidence and Martinez's own confession to investigators. Richardson's closing argument asked jurors to consider the possibility of mistake or conspiracy, but even he seemed to recognize the futility of arguing against scientific certainty. Jury deliberations lasted just 4 hours before returning with a verdict that surprised no one in the packed courtroom. We, the jury, find the defendant, Robert Martinez, guilty of kidnapping in the first degree, the jury foreman announced, his voice carrying clearly through the silent courtroom. We, the jury, find the defendant, Robert Martinez, guilty of murder in the first degree. The moment of conviction brought a mixture of triumph and sorrow to Harper's family and supporters. Justice had finally arrived, but it couldn't restore the 17 years of lost time or resurrect the dreams that had died with Harper on that October night. Lorraine Phillips embraced Detective Kim with tears of gratitude, whispering thank you in a voice that carried the weight of nearly 2 decades of hope deferred but not abandoned. Judge Henderson sentenced Martinez to life in prison without the possibility of parole, ensuring that he would never again have the opportunity to harm another young woman. As Martinez was led away in shackles, the community that had sustained itself on hope for 17 years could finally begin the process of true healing. 23 years after Harper Phillips vanished from Detroit's East Side, her story serves as both a testament to the persistence of love and a reminder that justice, while sometimes delayed, can still arrive with the force of scientific truth. The porch light that burned for 17 years in Lorraine Phillips' front window has finally been turned off, not in surrender, but in the peaceful knowledge that Harper's killer will never walk free again. The case revolutionized cold case investigations throughout Michigan, demonstrating how evidence preserved with care can yield answers decades after traditional investigative methods have been exhausted. Detective Sarah Kim's use of genealogical DNA analysis has become a model for law enforcement agencies nationwide, proving that technological advances can breathe new life into cases that seemed hopeless. Harper's legacy extends far beyond the courtroom victory that sent Robert Martinez to prison for life. The Harper Phillips Scholarship Fund, established with donations from community members who never forgot her dreams of becoming a pediatric nurse, has sent 12 young women to nursing school. Murphy's Diner, which closed in 2019, donated Harper's memorial photograph to the Detroit Historical Museum, where her smile continues to remind visitors that every missing person represents a universe of lost possibilities. For Lorraine Phillips, now 71, Harper's room remains exactly as she left it in October 2006, but the obsessive investigation materials have been replaced with photo albums celebrating Harper's 23 years of life, rather than focusing on her death. The community garden dedicated to Harper's memory continues to bloom each spring, tended by neighbors who understand that some stories of loss can be transformed into stories of hope, persistence, and the unbreakable bonds that connect us all.